right. Well, thank you everyone so much for being here tonight. My name is Mindy Zacharias. I'm the director of the Master of Public Administration program at the Fels Institute of Government at the University of Pennsylvania. We have a really exciting night tonight with our distinguished fellow, Elizabeth Vale, and very special guest, Senator Bill Bradley. I'll just do some quick housekeeping. The first portion of the evening will be an interview conducted by Elizabeth, and then the second part will be audience Q&A. So if you have questions for the Q&A, you can send them to me by direct message in the chat, and then I will call on folks to unmute and ask their questions. When you ask your question, include your name and your affiliation with tonight's event. So if you're a student, an alum, a community member. All right, I think that's all I've got. I'm going to turn it over to the wonderful Elizabeth Vale.
Thank you, Mindy, and thank you all of you for joining us tonight, and for John Lipinski, who I see is here, who runs Fels at Penn. But mostly, thank you, Bill Bradley, for joining us. Bill is a hero of mine. For now 40 years I've known you, as you know, and a hero of most of the people on this Zoom, and half of Philadelphia, I think. So, Bill, it's a great honor to have you with us. And as you know, I'm going to introduce you briefly, and then I get the first half hour of questions, and then we'll turn it over to the better questions, which always come from the field. So with that, let me quickly introduce Bill, Senator Bradley, I should call you, but in any case, everybody has your bio, but it's always fun to review it. I'm going way back. I know you were the #1 basketball player in the country, I believe, recruited by 70 colleges. And you went to the Penn of the North, right? Princeton.
Right. As of tonight, yes, that's true.
That's what it was. And by the way, I just told Bill, I looked up on Monday, this Monday at 7 o'clock, Penn is playing Princeton in basketball. So we may have to keep you until then. Anyway, then by the way, I noticed you won a gold medal while still at Princeton. Is that right? In the Olympics while you were still at
Correct.
Princeton?
In the Paleolithic era, back in 1964.
Before you graduated, gold medal. Yep. Then you were a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, a New York Knick for 10 years, senior senator from New Jersey for 18 years. And now you are a very significant business person at Allen & Co. You've been an advisor to McKinsey and an advisor to JP Morgan. I see visiting professor at Stanford and Notre Dame. I mean, it's a hell of a bio. So thank you for being here, for inspiring us, for all you've done for your public service, and for giving us this hour. So welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So my first question is always the same question, but it's fascinating, particularly, I think, to you. Can you tell us what or who may have inspired you early on in your life to achieve so spectacularly, to pursue these avenues?
Well, I really think parents are fundamental in the development of anybody's set of values or aspirations. And I was lucky to have two great parents who instilled in me a desire to achieve, excel, as well as sensitivity to other people.
That's it. That's a quick answer. And I remember you were the only child of the bank president, right? Crystal City, Missouri. So you must.
I grew up in a small town in Missouri, 3,492 people, and it was a factory town where most of the people worked at the Pittsburgh plate glass factory, and they came from all over. They came from Syria, Greece, Italy, Czechoslovakia, Ireland, Mexico. And my father was the banker in town, the small town banker, which made me the banker's son. And my mother was an energetic, church-going, civic club attending, college graduate, former elementary school teacher, who poured all of her attention into her only child, me. The combination of those two gave me a sense of direction. And then by the time I was 14, really, I was self-motivated. But up until then, they helped shape my view of what's possible and also of what values were important.
Mm-hmm. So did they ever say, Bill, we think you should be a doctor, we think you should be a dentist, we think you should,
No,
you know?
No,
be
no,
a rock
they
star
never,
basketball? Never.
there was never a career
Mm-hmm.
recommendation from either one of my parents. And I think that's really one of their geniuses, that they allowed
Mm-hmm.
me to find my own path.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they wanted me to do well in school. They didn't really care about sports too much. They liked to, if I did something, they'd like to see me do it well, but that wasn't the decisive message. It was more related to do well in school and see how the future takes
Mm-hmm.
care of itself.
Mm-hmm. So were they ever anti-basketball? I mean, I remember reading a sense of where you
No,
are.
they
No,
were
I just,
certainly not. They were certainly not anti-basketball. In fact, I remember that going through old family albums a few years ago, I ran across a picture of my mother who was on the 1927 Herculaneum High School basketball team in Missouri. And so
wow.
she was a basketball player. And actually, when I was 10, my mother and another friend built put a hoop in the backyard with a blacktop so you could play in all kinds of weather. And she came out and challenged me a couple of times. Unfortunately, one time she did fall and hurt her head, and she didn't come back out and try it again. But that was just a mistake. But no, they didn't. They didn't.
Yeah.
My father
Yeah.
really never saw a basketball game until I was in the 8th grade. Of the first
Wow.
basketball game he saw.
Huh. So did you plan any of this, Bill? I mean, looking back from now, it just looks spectacular and staggering, the mountaintops you have scaled. I mean, did you plan any of it? Like, how did it all happen?
No, I didn't plan any of it. I always had interim goals, so to speak. I always wanted to do well in school. I wasn't the best student, but I did well. In high school, I never thought, well, be a professional basketball player. I just wanted to win the state championship. And in college, I didn't think of basketball as professional. I wanted to be win the NCAA championship. So then things evolved from there. And then over the course of 10 years playing professional basketball, my interest in public life and public service grew as my interest in the game diminished. And ultimately, it was a kind of natural transition from there into politics. Now, it's a kind of a leap to run directly for the Senate from being a basketball player, but I did. And actually, it helped me because I remember in my first campaign, I'd go to events where I'd speak and there'd be 150 people there as opposed to 20 because they knew me as a basketball player. But that just gave me an opportunity to fail or succeed before 150 people as opposed to 20. So actually basketball helped in that first campaign get people's attention. And then, in politics, you want to be as best senator you can be. And that's what I tried to do.
Bill, I remember reading something way back about how your mother, whenever you played any games in the neighborhood, she always thought you should lose. Did I get that wrong?
No. When I was 10 in backyard games with my cousins that I had won, she declared them the winner. And
That's it.
She said to me, Bill, you gotta understand how it feels to lose. Life isn't always fair. So she was going to make sure that I understood not just the mountaintops, but the valleys, and understood they were connected in a very fundamental way.
Well, even if you had in fact won, that's a little bit interesting. Okay, but so the talents between the two professions you think overlap? I mean, they look ridiculously different to most people. I mean, obviously you have a love of winning, and of maybe being in the public eye.
Well, yeah, no, there are remarkable similarities. I mean, you just hit on one. I mean, in each profession, you meet the press every day, right? In each profession, there's a public rendering. It's either booing or cheering, or it's voting for you or not.
Mhm.
There's always the press involved in both professions.
Mhm.
The public as such becomes a big uh, actor in your life. And so there are these similarities. And you know that you're going to lose some and win some. And you know that if you lose, there's another game tomorrow. You know, if you lose a vote, there's another vote tomorrow. And while that perspective that life is, up and down, that's the nature of the rhythm of life. And I had that in basketball and I had that in politics. I remember actually it was in Philadelphia. My first year that I really started, I played starting forward. We were playing the Sixers, and at the end of the game, I made a bad pass. They intercepted, they won by 1 point. So Dave DeBuscher, who was my roommate at the time, he was like an older brother to me. He came back to the room. That's when we roomed together. And he said, what are you moping around for? And I said, well, I threw the bad pass. We lost the game. He said, look, you can't make the mistake of today the enemy of the triumph tomorrow.
Mm.
Get over it. Let's begin a new day. And
Mm.
I can't tell you how many times I thought of that, not just in other games in basketball, but in the Senate as well. When you lose a tough vote, let's go on to the next day.
Mhm. Fantastic life lesson for all of us. So you were senator for 18 years, incredibly long time. And we all watch the Senate today. It looks, unfortunately rather dysfunctional at times, a lot of times. I wonder if you think it's in crisis because of the partisanship or because the filibusters used to sort of strangle legislation all the time when it didn't used to be.
I think the problems in the legislative process are a number, one of which is money. There's way too much money in politics. People spend all their time worrying about raising money or trying to get people to spend money on their behalf. And that's courtesy of the Supreme Court, which equated money with speech and said you can't limit money because you'll be limiting speech, which is one of the most wrong-headed decisions that I have ever heard the court make. There is the existence of social media and the adversarial culture. That's not good. The gerrymandering is relevant in the House, but not in the Senate because you're a whole state all the time. But I still think there are ways that you can cooperate. For example, a few years ago, when Cory Booker became senator from New Jersey, he asked me what I thought he ought to do. And I said, I thought you ought to make good friends out of 4 or 5 Republicans. And that's what, I did that in the Senate. And it's a human institution. It's not something that's brittle. It's a human institution. And there are always ways that things happen because of human relationships. And so Cory did that. And lo and behold, we get to an issue about how does New Jersey get another tunnel into New York City? And the governor of New Jersey at the time, Chris Christie, gave up 10 years of work so that he could have the money to spend on his own idea of what roads and bridges are and forget the tunnel. But Cory resurrected the whole thing. And the key vote on the Appropriations Committee was a Republican from Mississippi, Wicker, who he had befriended and who had trust with him. So I think you can still find those moments in the Senate where the human relationship plays a very important role. And you're not going to find that on a national issue, but on the issues that you do with the senator. And for me, that's a very important lesson to learn, that in the Senate, there's only one thing really that you have, and that's your word. And if you give it, you keep it. That's basically a rule. Written, but it's true. And
Mhm.
I'll give you a story. It was in my last year in the Senate. This is a long time ago, obviously. But 1996, there was a big gas explosion in New Jersey, and people were killed. The pipeline shouldn't have been where it was located. And so I went to the floor to do an amendment to try to rectify the situation. I knew the amendment was not germane, meaning it shouldn't be on this appropriations bill. But I knew if I had 51 votes, it would be on the appropriations bill. And I thought I could get 51 votes. So I started speaking, and Trent Lott, who was the Republican leader, again, a senator from Mississippi, after I talked about an hour, came out and said, take your amendment down, take your amendment down. We got to do the business of the Senate. And I said, no, look, I want to, I have the votes and I'm going to push for it. But I want to talk, I have other things I want to say. So I talked about another hour. He comes out and says, take your amendment down. I said, no, I'm going to continue to do it. He said, look, if you take your amendment down, I give you my word that I will see that it passes the Senate.
Hmm.
I said, you give me your word? He said, yes. Okay. I took the amendment down. Now I leave the Senate. I'm at Stanford, right, as a professor. And one day my office gets a call from his chief of staff.
Mhm.
I speak to Senator Bradley. Okay, here I am. The leader, Lott, wanted me to just tell you the amendment that he said he would pass the Senate just passed the Senate today. So he kept his word, even though I wasn't in the Senate.
That's cool.
Unwritten rule. And so, you know, there are a lot of people who posture. There always were senators who postured, right?
Mhm.
But there may be a few more today. But there's still enough people who
Mhm.
could work together. I mean,
Mhm.
and across the aisle. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things I did as a senator was I started a program that brought Russian high school students to live with American families. And over a decade, over 25,000 kids came to live with American families, saw America, got an understanding. And every year I had to get the money for that. Well, a number of those years it was Republican Senate. And who was the person who was in charge of the purse? Mitch McConnell, right?
Wow.
So I'd go talk to Mitch and we worked something out.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of
Yeah.
legislating.
Yep.
Is
Yep.
compromise and listening. I always say as a senator, a legislator, ears are more important than mouth.
Mhm. I never
Some
learned that.
senators don't know that, by the way.
Yeah, me either. Um, so Bill, that's exciting to hear. And I know in 1986, you absolutely accomplished it with the Tax Act, which I watched. Astounding bipartisan work on your part to get rid of the loopholes and bring the rates down. And I wonder if you think, and you're very good friends, I know with Joe Biden, because you were with him for many, many years. And I was watching last week, the Kentucky bridge, you know, where he had McConnell and he had the Republicans from Ohio and had Sherrod Brown. I mean, are you hopeful that we're going to get more of that now? What are you thinking?
Well, yeah, I'm hopeful. I think that Joe understands the legislative process. He was a legislator for many, many, many years, right? He has dealt with Mitch McConnell over many, many years. He finds common ground. That's what you do if you're an excellent legislator. And so I do think there are plenty of things that can happen in the Senate. I'm not sure in the House because I'm not sure who's controlling the House.
Mhm.
If it is the far, far right, then nothing will happen.
Mhm.
But I think his impulse is the impulse of somebody who believes that institutions can still function. And the 86 Tax Act, of course, which is again one of those things many, many years ago, lowered rates to 28 and eliminated loopholes to pay for it. And basically the key there was that you began with certain principles, which is equal incomes pay equal tax, let the market allocate resources. Those are the two big principles. So why should we have a tax system in which people making the same amount of money pay a different tax? Because one uses loopholes, the other doesn't. We'll get rid of the loopholes and everybody will pay a lower tax. That was the whole
Mhm.
theory. And
Mhm.
that carried the day. And it was very important. And it was done with 4 senators, 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats in a room for 2 weeks, and we wrote the whole bill. And that was after Perils of Pauline. It went on for weeks, but at the end, it came together, and it came together in a bipartisan way, pursuant to several principles. And to me, those are the relevant aspects of that bill.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, it's legendary. You are legendary, and it is absolutely part of why you're legendary.
You might be a little biased when you say that.
No, I'm completely objective. I am
Legendary, I
actually.
don't know. I mean, there are a lot.
Well, okay, we'll leave that. Another area that you're sort of, and I have to say it, legendary about or in is NAFTA and free trade. You were one of the key leaders in that regard. Why do you think, or what, tell me about your view of today's protectionism or greater protectionism, and can we get back to where you were?
I think that what happened is that people forgot about the individuals that were adversely affected by open trade. And because of that, a lot of people lost their jobs and they had no other place to go because nobody was thinking about it. If you're in a world where you have healthcare covered, where you have a good pension guaranteed, where you have opportunity for education, and where you can have skills that you can acquire to get a new and better job, then open trade can really maximize everybody's benefit. But if you're in a situation where open trade is simply for a corporation to offshore to cheap labor and forget about, and then put the lives of the individuals involved off on the government or anybody else, then that's a problem. So I think that we're in a different time now, and we've had 2 decades of wreckage of the middle class, and some cases a large number of white males, and or males anyway, and that's created a real problem in the politics and in the society, and it's clearly created a problem with the with open trade. I think, for example, when President Obama proposed the TPP, which if I said that word, who would understand what that means, right? I guess nobody. But what it meant was the U.S. was going to use its economic power to lead in Asia, and it was rejected because of small reasons.
Fascinating. So, Bill, we were talking in a class the other day about how the concept.
Let me say one other thing. The premise of NAFTA is that we have one North American economy, and to the extent that there are jobs in the United States, and then there are jobs in Mexico, and let's assume we're one unit. And if jobs are in Mexico, then Mexican workers are not going to come north because they'll have what they need in Mexico. We frequently forget that. Just as we forget with immigration, the whole battle of immigration, it's a labor issue as much as anything else. I mean, we have labor shortage in this country today. And I think there is a connection between the labor shortage in America and the curtailment of immigration. There are other problems as well, like early retirement for people who are baby boomers and younger people who don't want to work. And then you have a lot of other reasons, but I think that it's important.
So we were talking in a class recently about the Constitution and how it's in a way let us down, and it obviously is a very old document. It's been a pretty amazing document, and much of it is still relevant. But if if we had a new constitutional convention and you were, either king or president, what sorts of things might you think of modifying?
I think I'd want an equal rights amendment. for women
Oh,
in the
yeah.
Constitution. I think I would maybe abolish the Electoral College. Those are two changes that I might make.
Good. We'll have to nominate you, run it. Okay, last question from me, and then we're going to get to the really good ones from the floor. So this is not an easy question, but do you have any hope for us, any sort of feedback on the recent midterms or on what you're seeing for 24? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I think the midterms were a tremendous ratification of President Biden. I think that the midterms essentially said that all the things that were accomplished, whether it's infrastructure bill, whether it's the bill on semiconductors, any number of other bills actually were reaching people. And they appreciate government now working for them in ways that help their pocketbooks. And I think that that was a very positive message. I think that the Supreme Court helped with its ruling on abortion. That will continue to be the case until there are changes. So I come out of the midterm saying, the worst that we expected just did not materialize.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the candidates that Republicans had were not high quality candidates, but I do think that it was the substance that also played a very important role in a Democratic victory. Plus, it was the execution. Democrats realized that there's a ground game that's important out there.
Mm-hmm.
Identifying people, getting them to the polls, not simply putting ads on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that all of those things were produced this historic vote, and I think it augurs well for 2024. If you can possibly foresee the players in 2024, so it's a little early to do that right now, but the same ideas: substance leads, pay attention to people, just like everybody on this, people say to me, well, what can I do? Well, the most important thing you can do is vote.
Mm-hmm.
And the most important thing you do is get other people to vote.
Mm-hmm.
The story of America is the story of the vote, who gets it and how they use it.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that is will be true in 2024 in a way that has never been the case before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 2020, more people voted than ever before in history, but it was still like 66%, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
meant what? 34% of the people didn't vote.
Right.
In places like Australia and other places, 95% of the people vote. So I think that there's still room to improve that. And to me, that's the key thing for Democrats. And why shouldn't it be the key thing to Republicans too, if we want the people to decide?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Supreme Court there also did not help with allowing genuine voter suppression laws to be passed without review by the federal government in places like Georgia and Texas and other places. And that's fundamentally anti-democratic, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm sure you saw the Biden honoring the 12 real heroes last week who stood up for voter protection. One of them in our town, Al Schmidt, who was the Republican here who certified the election and had all the death threats honored.
Yeah.
He was one of them.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, great. I'm gonna give us to Mindy now.
Just pause there.
Sorry.
Ben was trying to do what? What did he do?
I'm sorry.
The man who got the death threats.
Yeah, Al Schmidt was the Republican on our voter protection commission in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And he certified the election.
Just think of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy who tries to make democracy work.
Yep.
And people threaten his life.
Yep.
Well, what does that say? There is an assault on democracy going on.
Yep.
And, Republicans in Georgia stood up when Trump tried to steal the election, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are plenty of Republican officials around the country who have high values and believe in democracy. And it's time for them to stand up. And there's things that are higher than party, one of which is the democratic process itself, which is endangered now by Supreme Court decisions and state legislatures that don't have respect for democracy.
Nope, I think we agree, and I think we are hopeful as you are after the midterms. Okay, Mindy, I'm going to give us back to you for the last half hour.
Great, thanks so much. And thanks so much, Senator Bradley. This is very, very interesting. We've got some great questions. I'll encourage folks, if you have questions, please do send them to me by direct message, and please include your connection with tonight's event. There is a method to our madness. It just helps us to organize the questions better. So if you've been sending them to Colleen, what you want to do is send them to me instead. And then we'll get you going. To start us off, we have John Henry, who is a recent graduate from the class of 2022 from the MPA class. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Mindy. And thank you, Senator Bradley, for joining us tonight. As somebody who had storied careers in pretty vastly different fields to the outsider, did you have any core guiding principles that helped you replicate success when you made the transition from professional basketball to the Senate?
When I was 14 years old, I went to a basketball camp put on by a former NBA player. And he told the assembled campers one morning, if you're not practicing, remember somebody somewhere is practicing. And if you two meet, given roughly equal ability, he will win. Well, that was the origin of my workaholism. And I was never going to lose because I didn't put in the time to develop my skills to the highest level that my body would allow and mind would allow the skills to be developed. And fast forward, I'm now in the Senate. I'm assigned to the Finance Committee. I walk in and we're discussing the Uruguay trade round, right? The Tokyo trade round. I sat in that room at the far end where the junior member sits, and I did not understand one word that was said that day. And so I said, well, gotta go back and work, go back and practice, have the discipline, and so you develop your skill. And in the Senate, there are two kinds of senators. There's a senator who's a process senator who's a substantive senator. And I wanted to be a substantive senator, meaning somebody who was able to influence other people by the basis of what you know, but not because of trades or whatever. But you have to, in order to know something, you have to put in the time to learn it. Just like in order to succeed and win a championship, you have to put in the time to develop your skills. So that the idea of discipline was a very fundamental value that played out in both professions. Another would be imagination. You have to imagine something new and different. I mean, why did no one do the tax reform until 1986? Because nobody imagined how to make it happen. How did in the fifth game in 1970, when we were playing the Lakers and our star senator went down, we had to go into the locker room and imagine a whole new offense without the center. So the imagination played a big role. And then I also think the third thing that is relevant in both is selflessness. Well, I always figured that who got the credit was not as important as what got done. And in basketball, it's pretty easy to see that. You're just 1 point on a 5-pointed star. It's a team that wins and not an individual. And in politics, it would be great. I always stood in the back when there was a press conference. Let somebody else stand forward and take the credit. You want to give people credit. The more generous you are in giving people credit, the more you'll be able to influence them and bring them together at a future time. So those three things, I think, play a role: discipline, selflessness, and imagination.
Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much. For our next question, we have Barbara Adams, who is a community member and a friend of Fels. Go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you, Mindy and Senator Bradley. I too, like Elizabeth and like everybody on this call, likely, am a huge fan. So I'm delighted you're here. And I know that you left the Senate a long time ago, and since then have had a very active career in business. So I wondered if you could compare the fulfillment you have had in your business pursuits with that I assume you had as a US Senator. I'm making an assumption here about fulfillment in both cases.
Well, you know, people often ask me, they used to ask me, not now, but they used to ask me, what was a bigger thrill, winning 2 NBA championships, or being elected to the Senate 3 times, right? And I'd say, well, being elected to the Senate 3 times is the greatest honor. But all that gave me was a chance to work 14 hours a day in order to prove that people were wrong in sending you there. But when you win the championship, you stand at half court, your fist raised in the air, chills going up and down your spine, and you know you're the best in the world. And that's an incomparable feeling. So if you want to know what thrill, that's a bigger thrill than the Senate. And it's certainly a bigger thrill than doing a deal in the private sector. Although there are some similarities in many places, genius plays a role in all of them. And being able to identify and cultivate genius of other people is critical in basketball, in politics, and certainly in the investment business.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Our next question was from a community member. Tell us, why do you think it is that politics, especially in Washington, are so much more polarized now than they were decades ago?
I think because money plays a bigger role, because the Supreme Court made a wrong-headed decision on saying money is speech. I think because the state legislatures are ruthlessly gerrymandering districts and now gerrymandering districts in the state legislature, so that you don't get districts that are relatively even, but you get districts that swing heavily to one party or the other, and whoever is the dominant party gets the most districts. I mean, if you're in a district that's 52-48, in order to win, you have to listen to the other side. If you're in a district that's 60-40, you don't care about a general election. You only care about being primaried, having some person on the far left or the far right challenge you. So I think that the gerrymander problem and the money problem are two very important aspects. And then the third is we seem to reward through social media those people who frequently lie, those people who frequently want to just polarize. And we need to have more people on social media who figure out how to drive a narrative that brings people together. We don't have that now. Occasionally, President Biden gets to that level, but it's difficult. So I think those are the things that have changed between now and then. And I date this to when Newt Gingrich took over as the Speaker of the House, or before he was Speaker of the House, when he would go on TV on the floor of the House and ruthlessly attack the majority leader of the Republicans, not on substance, but on personal attacks. And when we began to think of politics as war, not a war that the goal of which was to destroy the other human being, that's when we ended up not having an ability to listen to the other human being.
Thank you so much. Okay, for our next question, we have Nancy Chiswick, and hopefully she is there. Nancy was a delegate in the Democratic Convention in 2000, along with Elizabeth, and I think that is a significant one for you as well. Let's see, go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you very much. And thank you both, Elizabeth and also Senator. It's been just a delightful program. I'm really glad to be here and to hear you speaking. As I confess my history in politics along with Elizabeth, and having watched things over these many decades, I'm most troubled by seeing people not be nice to one another and to not cooperate. And it seems quite different. I mean, yes, there's been a kind of an ebb and flow, but especially recently, it seems as if people are so often antagonistic and unwilling to listen to one another. And I loved your story about how you made friends. I do think that makes, first of all, makes life nicer, but it also makes the probability of getting along and accomplishing things more likely. But do you have any other suggestions as to how we as citizens might be able to encourage our legislative bodies, whether it's at the state level or the national level, to get more done, to stop the discord and the dysfunction? I'm a Pennsylvania resident, and you probably heard about what's happening in Harrisburg. I'm embarrassed to say. And how can we help our legislators know that what we need is for them to get along and to do the business of what citizens need at all these different levels? Again, thank you very much.
Having clarity about what has to be done is important. If there are 55 things that need to get done, there'll be no focus on getting things done, and you'll allow all of these dividers to take over. But if you have, and that's, I think, the whole thrust of the infrastructure bill. Why did that get both sides supporting it? Because it's clear what it is. People see bridges, they see ports, they understand that. Well, you know, why shouldn't you pick 2 or 3 others, whether it's education or whether it's healthcare, and have a very clear thing that you want to get done? To me, I think that's important. And then when you go to a town meeting, don't accept razzle dazzle as an answer, and don't accept refusal to answer as an answer. Follow up and say, you didn't answer the question. What is this? What is that? And try to get somebody to give you a sense of who they are as a human being. To me, I think those are the important ways for citizens to interact. And with social media, I mean, you know, you can build a movement. You couldn't do that in the past. Build a movement for common sense, build a movement for bipartisanship, build a movement for compromise. And you can do that from your home almost. So, I mean, there are plenty of things to do. Democracy is not something somebody else does. It's something you do. And to the extent that you're willing to commit yourself to the exercise of democracy and put energy in it, then we're going to have a better chance if there are millions of people like you doing that than if we simply wait for somebody else to do it. Some powers that be. That's not the way it works.
Bill, can I ask a quick question, a follow-up there? I'm pretty sure you wrote an op-ed years ago, which I'll never forget, about the pyramid, which is the Republican Party versus the Democrats pyramid, and how the Republicans have the pyramid that's normal, and they have this huge infrastructure out in the field, and it doesn't matter who they run, but we have to run a really big, well, that's relevant, isn't it now?
Well, I do think it's relevant. Yeah. I mean, the basic thrust of the article was to say the Republican Party, think of it as a pyramid. On the base of it is money. On top of that are think tanks. On the top of that are political consultancies. On the top of that are message people. On the top of that are the dark arts. And at the top is the candidate. So the candidate benefits from all this. On the Democratic side, you invert the pyramid. The candidate has got to invent all those things. So I think Democrats now have begun to wake up a little bit about how important party building is, particularly when it comes to voting and the voting structures. But there's a long way to go.
And isn't, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, and isn't a conclusion of that at least, I think it was like 15 years ago or something, 10 at least, you wrote that. And it wasn't the conclusion then that we need a huge candidate, a hugely powerful candidate, if you're a Democrat, to win because we don't have the infrastructure underneath yet.
No, I mean, we're basically Democrats. And I won't say this is, and certainly post-Trump you can't, but Democrats depended more on the star system
Yeah,
than the political process.
right,
And Republicans historically developed their talent in the political process. And at the top, they had the candidate.
right,
Who wasn't always a star, but he benefited or she benefited from all of the work that other people had done to build that pyramid.
right.
I do think some Democrats now have awakened to that. And hopefully, I know any number of groups that understand that I know a group, for example, who can tell you, if you go to Pennsylvania, how many people have moved into Pennsylvania in the last 4 years from someplace that's a blue state, but they're not registered to vote in Pennsylvania. And therefore, you have a target audience of who you contact to register and then to get them out to vote. That's the kind of thing that has to happen more and more. So much money is spent on media and ads, and
Mhm.
not enough money is spent on building the infrastructure of the party politics of how do you register people to vote? How do you get them out to vote? How do you make them citizens who count, meaning voters, as opposed to citizens who complain?
Mhm.
Frequently people who are naive. They don't understand how things work.
Right. Interesting. Okay, great. Sorry, Mindy, back to you.
No, thanks so much. It's absolutely fascinating. All right, our next question is from Andrew Orange, who is from Fox Leadership. Andrew, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Mindy. Hi, Senator. I actually have two questions. Hopefully they're quick. So Biden has been president for 2 years now. What do you, and he's president for another 2 before he runs for re-election. What do you think he could be doing better in the presidency? And looking back on your legislative career, if you could do something different, what would it have been and why?
Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. I think the president's actually doing a very good job. What could he do better? He probably, good point. What could he do better? He could probably tell more stories and communicate more through narrative and less through numbers. I think that might be something that he can do. In terms of my greatest disappointment, well, I think that there are a number, but I'll give you one disappointment. And reflecting back on the program I was discussing earlier, that we were able to establish, bringing 25,000 Russian kids to live with American families. That ended in 2015. Vladimir Putin ended it. And that was a big loss for me, because every year I'd meet with these kids, there'd be 1,200 of them. They'd all come from families that would be afraid to have them go to the United States because they were told for many decades that this was an evil place. And they discovered, no, it's not. And I remember one young woman writing a letter saying, what I learned is that Americans are just like Russians. They want their families to do well. And Putin repealed that. So that is a big disappointment for me.
Thanks so much. Okay, our next question is from Eric Rugart, who is a Fels alum from 1983. He says, Senator, considering the tightrope of fiscal responsibility that is the sword of Damocles over the global economy, should the Ds have supported a moderate R as speaker?
Sure, but definitely, I thought Fred Upton was from Michigan, who was a moderate Republican. Somebody would have proposed that. But do you need a couple of Republicans who would vote for him? Because Democrats don't have the votes. And if a Republican had proposed a moderate Republican like Fred Upton, I'm sure all Democrats would have voted for him. But now we don't know what we have. I mean, we have a speaker now, but we don't know the extent to which we're going to default on the debt. It seems we are. We're going to cut defense spending, $75 billion, and Ukraine, cut it out. Seems that's what they want to do. And that they can call at any moment for a vote to throw the speaker out and put one of their people in. And so I think that we don't know how this is going to go. My hope is that we can actually legislate. And I think Hakeem Jeffries made a good statement where he said, look, we want to work with the other side to do things for the American people. And, having constant investigations about everything and pointing the finger and demagoguing, it's a kind of performative art. It's not even art, a performative game that people play as opposed to legislating. I mean, Mitch McConnell, you say you dislike him or whatever, but he's a legislator. He knows how to get things done. And there are plenty in the Republican Party who know that in the House, but they're allowing the dominant right-wing zealots to determine the agenda.
Thank you so much. All right, our next question, and we have a few folks that are looking for either if you have a crystal ball or different insights. So our next question is.
I don't know. I'll take a step in the crystal ball. I do not think the Knicks will win the NBA championship.
All right.
Wait, how about Princeton Penn on Monday?
Sixers, I don't know. Maybe we'll see.
Oh, the Sixers. All right, good.
Great. Wonderful. So I think our next question, we have Joseph McCarthy, who is a friend of Fels and community member. I think he should be there. Let's see. Joseph, go ahead.
Yes.
Unmute there.
Oh, now I'm unmuted. Thank you for doing this, Senator. Great fan of yours and great fan of Elizabeth Vale. Got here a framed copy of the invitation to your talk in the John F. Kennedy Forum at the Kennedy School of Government, which will be 27 years ago this coming Monday. But we remember it well here. I was an
And I remember
associate
you were sitting in the third row.
He's
Very
a dean.
good.
He's a dean. Joe
What a
is an academic dean.
What
At
a
the
great
Kennedy
what a great politician you are. Yes, indeed.
But what
So-
you can't see on this, here I'm making it, what you can't see on this poster and what you can't see on this small invitation is that you autographed it to our 7 or 8-year-old son. And you wrote, "To Kevin, keep practicing." So when you gave that story about.
Oh, you're muted, Marina. You're muted. You're muted, you guys.
Muted. So,
Oh, anyway, so I
so
don't know why
keep
that.
practicing was the.
Keep
was the answer.
practicing was what you wrote in that autograph. And so I knew when you said,
To the question, I mean, we
anecdote.
threw something in about, who did you admire among your colleagues on both sides of the aisle? But we always admired the relationship of Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch, and some of those relationships that took place in the Senate of bygone era. In your case, who was it that you worked most effectively with on the other side of the aisle, perhaps, and maybe on the Democratic side of the aisle?
Well, the Republicans, of course, Bob Packwood, who was the chairman of the Finance Committee. I worked with Jack Danforth, who was on the Finance Committee. And just as somebody who I trusted, Al Simpson of Wyoming. Those are 3 Republicans that I worked with. Plenty of Democrats, but the relevant point is the Republicans.
Yeah.
I recently did a one-man show. And I had a film of it and sent it to Bob Packwood, and he looked at it and he was highly complimentary, particularly about what I said about him, which is he was the guy that drove the whole process of tax reform in '86.
That's great. No, and we love Al Simpson. He came to be director of the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School for several years. And he always used to tell the students, when you're in Washington, always take the high moral road. You won't find much traffic up there.
Bill, I remember
you.
I met you, of course, in 1983 when I worked for John Hines. And I used to watch you and Bob Dole, who chaired finance that year. And it was fun. Everybody laughed. It was hilarious, a lot of it. I mean, you worked hard, but there was a tremendous collegiality. I remember that was 1983.
Yeah, that's true. Dole was great with his eyes.
It was funny.
What do I mean by that? Well, you could tell he would signal with you what he was thinking with his eyes. And you'd learn to read the signals.
That's funny. Okay, Mindy.
All right, I know we were running close on time, but I think we'll try to at least squeeze one more in. Our next question is from Elsa Schaefer, who was also a friend of Fels and a delegate in the 2016 Democratic National Convention. Go ahead, Elsa. Oops,
You're muted. You're muted.
gotta accept the unmute. There you go.
There.
All right. Thank you, Mindy, and what an hour to everybody here. I just have to say, let's pretend this isn't so crystal ball. Let's pretend Joe Biden decides not to run. Let's also double pretend that Kamala decides not to run. Are you comfortable telling us whom you think we ought to watch in informing how that race ends up in November?
Well, I'm a big fan of Amy Klobuchar, senator from Minnesota. I think she's got a lot of talent. I think on the outside, Gina Raimondo has got a lot of talent. Of course, there's Corey. I think there'll be a lot of people running. And the people who have run before have an advantage. They know what the gauntlet is. People like Gavin Newsom or Pritzker or whatever, they don't really know what the heck they're going to get into if they decide to run, but the others do. And, you know, if neither Joe nor Kamala run, you know, as I said, I'm a big fan of Amy Klobuchar. But
Great
let me say one thing before this thing ends. I think Fels is a very important institution. I'm the chairman of the Volcker Alliance, for example. And Paul Volcker, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, believed in public service and he believed in public administration. It's great to have people who have a lot of theories in political science departments, but who's going to run the government? Who's going to make sure that the budget is balanced, that the food or that the garbage is picked up, that all of the things that a good public administrator assures? And so I really think it's important that places like Fels teach public administration, because that is what democracy is great, but the reason it's great is when it delivers for people. And the thing between the passage of the law and the speech and the experience of the voter is because of public administration, making sure that government functions efficiently. So I'm a big fan of what Fels does, and really just want to offer you a compliment to keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. That's music to our ears, and these students are spectacular, so they're worthy of it. Mindy, do you have one more, or shall I take over?
Sure. Well, I'll have one more. It's a quick one and a fun one, and from one of our alum, John Henry, who led us off. What was the bloodier arena, NBA basketball in the 1970s or US politics in the 1990s?
Well, I was used to say that one was physical, the other was mental, emotional. I mean, you know, when you're a senator, you don't have to wake up every morning, crawl on your hands and knees into the bathtub and soak in hot water in order to be able to walk. Do that in basketball, but also there's not the level of constant tension that exists in politics.
All right. Well,
Good
thank you
answer.
again so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth, but this was such a treat. Thank you.
Wonderful. So Bill, my last question is nearly always the same and people love it. And it is this: if you could tell your 25-year-old self a couple of things, 2 or 3 things, what would they be? Because we have some great 25-year-olds in our classes.
Don't lose your idealism. The world can be a better place if you choose to make it that way. You're in control of your future. Master a subject. Understand what I said about imagination, selflessness, and discipline. Pick an area that you want to make a difference in, and then put the effort in. To me, that's really what it's about. And as you know, Elizabeth, I just completed this film called Rolling Along, which is a kind of performative autobiography in which I really talk about all of those things and how they evolved in my own life. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long while. And so don't get discouraged. If you have a defeat, don't get discouraged. Move on, take the next battle. And the next battle, the next battle. If you like what you're doing, that's absolutely, know what your passion is and follow that passion. I mean, you don't have to be in government. I mean, you might want to be a violinist. Do that. I don't know if you'd go to Fels school if you're a violinist, but if you're passionate about government, pick a place that you're going to begin and learn it, and respect people you're with, and have a smile on your face, and don't get down, and learn to tell stories, to communicate. All the great leaders speak through stories. So those would be a few ideas.
Those are great ideas. And Bill, I was going to, and I'm still going to conclude with talking about your fabulous documentary, because everybody here could spend until tomorrow talking to you, but we can wait for it, and it's going to come out. Bill mentioned it, but it's called Rolling Along, recently finished. It's an autobiography. I think you called it a performative autobiography because Bill, it's a one-man show. I've seen it. It is spectacular. It is incredibly inspiring. It is one of the best things I've seen. One of the best documentaries, there's no doubt. So we're waiting for it. What do you think? A couple months, we might see it out there?
Well, I wish you worked for a streamer and could say, yeah, I'll take it. I'll put it on Netflix. We'll see whether anybody wants it. If not, I'll put it on YouTube. So people will be able to see it.
They will. It's breathtaking. So we'll watch for it. Rolling Along. Anyway, thank you.
It's not a documentary. It's me on the stage telling a story.
Okay, yeah, it's right. It's factual. It's fabulous and moving.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you. I told you I would always do anything you asked me, and here I are. You've asked me to do this, and I've done it. So put a check on next to my name, please.
I will, but I have one more ask, Bill. You're younger than most of the people who are talking about running for president. So I hereby draft you, okay? And we will run your campaign, and you will probably win because you always do. So how about that?
Well, I always do, except in 2000.
Well, no, but you know what? Yeah, but not every time. It's the second time. We'll do it. Anyway, thank you for your public service. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for joining us. We love you. We do. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Have a good weekend.